Hi, my name's Alan Boyd, and this is Abolish Property Taxes Part 1. How evangelicals through the Christian Coalition helped liberalize America through the property tax deduction. How evangelicals put the ends of getting it to a more productive economy above the means by breaking the biblical rules for property rights. Let me start out by explaining how the Republican Party shifted from Goldwater to Reagan to set the proper context for this article. Barry Goldwater was the true founder of Reagan conservatism, but he couldn't win at the time he ran. Groups like the Moral Majority helped add in a social right-wing voter value piece to the Republican Party so they could win elections, and it worked. Much of the funding for the Moral Majority did not come from evangelicals, but from donors interested in the Republicans winning for economic advantages. The true thrust of the Republican Party was never moving the country to the right socially. In 1973, Goldwater wrote a bill that allowed for taxpayers to deduct property taxes paid on their federal tax returns. He called it a property tax relief bill. He claimed it would relieve taxpayers of some of the burden of paying property taxes by giving them a break on their federal returns. The bill passed. As it turned out, the bill ended up encouraging using property taxes to fund more things like education. Richer communities could build up their own neighborhoods, schools, streets, sidewalks, parks, libraries, and park districts, while state sales and state income taxes were divided among the entire state. The cost of living increased in these nice suburbs along with the price of housing because they were now in nicer neighborhoods. Professionals and people connected with strong unions like teachers and police saw their salaries increasing, oftentimes even more than the rate that the cost of living was increasing. It is important to note that various occupations that tend to lean towards different political parties saw gains in their real income in order for the changes to gain political support. For instance, teachers and police officers tend to vote Democratic, and then people connected with corporate America tend to vote Republican, and they always fight back and forth saying they're each getting too much money. Well, they're both benefiting from this higher cost of living. Many lower income workers who were not connected did not see increases in salaries, while the cost of living went up. This has helped to lead to the incredible number of people who rely on food stamps today. It has also caused a strain on the family. Many people who started families young had a very tough time, and financial problems are the greatest cause of divorce today. We see many more struggling single mothers than ever before. People began to put off starting families until they could afford them, a time period that stretched out longer and longer through the 80s and 90s. But the economy flourished, and the rich continued to get richer, and the upper middle class grew and benefited too. Big corporations grew, and more people were institutionalized in them, having to work harder to keep up with the higher cost of living and conform to corporate politics. The Christian Coalition that basically replaced the Moral Majority gave A-plus ratings to politicians who were for giving federal tax breaks for property taxes. These politicians were not marked down at all on their scorecards, and they should have gotten an F. Leviticus 25:23 says, "The land must not be sold permanently, because the land is mine, and you are but aliens and my tenants. The land belongs to God, and he gave it to the people, not the government." God even allowed all families to return to their land every 40 years. This is redistribution of the land to the people through the government. What America is doing is the other way around. The government is renting the land to the people. I must point out that in 1973, blacks were only beginning to get a real piece of the pie in America. The civil rights movement that protected the voting rights of blacks in the South would end up benefiting the upper middle class and rich by dividing the country. Whites in the South hated unions. This is because mostly driven by the fact that a black man would get the same pay as a white man. It would not be based on performance. As a result, President Ronald Reagan was able to crush the power of inefficient labor unions back in the 1980s, allowing for capital to move into more efficient ventures. Over in Europe, it was just the opposite. Strong labor forced capital to stay in inefficient ventures. This allowed for lots of economic growth for America, as seen in the 1990s. As a result of the racial situation, America and South Africa were the only Western countries without universal health care. Entitling people to a better overall standard of living would benefit blacks the most, so America did not spend that way. Property taxes allowed the haves to build up their neighborhoods, so they could avoid the racial tensions that lower income people sometimes faced. Their neighborhoods continued to go up in value, while the neighborhoods that didn't have a strong property tax base oftentimes saw their home values declining or staying the same. Allow me to use Illinois as an example of how property taxes helped liberalize the nation. In 1973, when abortion was legalized, Illinois passed a measure that said if abortion was ever turned back to the states, it would become automatically illegal in Illinois. The states did not want abortion to be legal at the time. When abortion was overturned back to the states for a brief time, Illinois had a statewide election in 1990. The whole country was electing Republican attorney generals because crack and gang violence was getting so out of hand in the black communities. Even Cook County, the county Chicago resides in, had a Republican attorney general named Jack O'Malley, and it seemed like all white people liked him. In the 1990 Illinois Attorney General's race, an African American named Roland Burris ran as a pro-choice Democrat and barely beat a pro-life Republican. Being pro-choice was the main reason Roland Burris won. With the anti-crime sentiment sweeping the whole country, one would have thought the Republican was a shoo-in since the Attorney General cannot outlaw abortion anyway. That same Republican would win the Attorney General's race easily in 1994 after Bill Clinton was in office and the pro-life threat was over. Women in Illinois during that period rallied against anyone who was pro-life. But after this period, a pro-life stance was very popular in Illinois. In fact, there has been a pro-life politician from liberal Illinois in the U.S. Senate and governor's office in this century. The reason why Illinois became so pro-choice in 17 years was because the cost of living increased more here than in other states. When people thought of young women getting pregnant, they worried of how hard it would be for them compared to the generation before. What pro-choice Goldwater had done was taken away the right for women to opt out of an abortion. There was now young women having abortions when in the past they might have been starting a family. I read that in the 1800s, many women were already pregnant during their weddings. Women have fewer children later in life. Women having fewer children later in life has been a boost to the economy in the short run. The safety net was huge, but many, seeing how people lived who survived off of it, would rather work harder and wait longer to have kids than to fall into it. This has helped the economy even more. What I noticed happening in America in the early 1990s is that conservative Democrats who are not very pro-property taxes or big corporations had to switch to being pro-choice from pro-life to keep their seats. My state congressman, while studying at NIU in DeKalb, was one of those who had to switch. He won re-election the first time due to the strong pro-choice support and name recognition, but lost in the next election because Bill Clinton was president and Republicans seized on the small-town pro-life views to elect Republicans where they had not held office for a long time. Our state probably would have gone liberal less quickly if we had kept the conservative Democrat in office, even if he had to reluctantly move to the left on abortion and other social issues. Christian priorities should be the economy first before social issues. If the economy moves in the direction of high property taxes, more corporate influence, and a higher cost of living, it will move to the left on almost all social issues eventually. Black families have had the most destruction due to the system. I always hate how people blame the destruction of the black family on liberals for welfare. In a high cost of living environment, if welfare and food stamps were taken away, the condition of the poor and working class would be even worse. Republicans act like they hate all welfare, including food stamps. Then why did they not try and do away with the safety net under George W. when they had all the power? It is because they want a safety net while continuing to talk about less government and free markets. They pride themselves in conservative values while they really just care about taking care of people who have and make good money. Conservatives are deceptive and they would never get rid of the safety net. Without it, they couldn't keep the cost of living so high that forces Americans to work harder, helping to grow the economy. Blacks suffer from the high cost of living that causes the country to demand a safety net that destroys the black family the most. When blacks didn't work in the Old South, they suffered in deeper poverty than those who worked. Why are blacks not working to abolish property taxes and to limit corporate power? There is another reason from the Bible that could be destroying the black family that I will only touch on because it should be a part of a different discussion. In the past, black husbands in the South had more control over property, like their homes, than their wives did. When these biblical-based laws were removed, this also hurt relations among husbands and wives. Rich white men always seem to find ways to get around gender-based political changes with psych wards and prenuptials. That's the end of part 1. Thank you for tuning in. All right.